This is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Empire of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue talking about anime series and using them in your BESM game. I've got two classic OVA series, some of them have some movies too in there, but we'll get to those as part of it. But two classic OVA series and some more from summer 2015 of last year. So we're actually kind of getting to the end of those. I only have a few more weeks of that, and then we'll move on to something new and exciting. Perhaps older. Perhaps we'll get by 2015 finally. We'll see. But anyway, let's dive into the two OVAs. I've got IriaZeiram the Animation and Armitage III. So let's talk about IriaZeiram the Animation. And of course, as I said, it's an OVA series. It focuses around this bounty hunter in training named Iria, who's been training under her brother Gren. Now, Gren gets this job with his friend Bob and takes Iria along with them to basically go rescue this ship out in space, that there's some kind of problem going on there. They go there and find that everyone there has been slaughtered by some kind of sort of alien creature that is nearly immortal called Zeiram. Zeiram was in the cargo hold and got loose and killed everyone. In the ensuing chaos of rescuing, the few remaining people that were there and getting everybody away, Gren gets stuck on there, basically fighting Zeiram, and we do not know what happens to him. Iria then goes and crash lands and effectively, gets separated from Bob and the other survivors that they had managed to find. The very last two people that were still alive. And so then Iria then gets plagued by assassins and she doesn't know why. She kind of finds out that Zeiram survives. She ends up finding Bob in a kind of form. It turns out that Bob's body effectively died, but they managed to transfer his mind into an AI to try to find out what he knew. Because it turns out this corporation had been originally transporting Zeiram in hopes to have tests to basically gain control of him and use him as a weapon. He's basically an alien super monster that they were trying to weaponize. Went wrong. It's basically like the plot from Aliens a little bit there. So she ends up then, reuniting with Computer Bob and she advances her abilities as a bounty hunter, going out on her own and continuing to investigate what had happened, dealing with problems with the corporation, and trying to stop Zeiram once and for all. Also, in the meantime, finding out what happened to her brother on that ship, whether he really died or not in the ensuing chaos. So the genres of this one are, of course, adventure. There is a lot of action, but it's all about that traveling to places, going and checking out derelict ships, ending up in new cities. It's all about the adventure part of it. It's, of course, a sci-fi. It's set in this kind of sort of space-based futuristic universe. There's all these different planets where very interesting things and very cool kind of technology that's there. I would also kind of call it a little bit of a horror, especially in those areas with Zeiram on the ship. He is a kind of horrific monster that can do a lot of destructive things and almost spread little creature versions of himself to plague places if he kind of gets infested in it. It's kind of a mild horror because of this. I would rate this one a 5. It's one of the lesser known classics, I think, at this point in time, which I really recommend. IriaZeiram the Animation. I highly recommend it. It's actually one of my favorites. Now, if you're using it in a BESM game, I'd recommend 400 points. Be a team of bounty hunters, and your team of bounty hunters could, of course, go on any kind of normal missions. They could deal with some of the various corporations and their power of banks, but you could also deal with Zeiram in some kind of way, that he's some kind of threat either to your planet, or you end up going to some place where he's a threat and they have to try to neutralize him, and he could always become this kind of reoccurring force that's to deal with. They're going to have to kind of continually trying to mitigate with hopes of finally finishing it off, because it has very few, if any, weaknesses that no one tends to find out what they are, unfortunately. That makes it near immortal, and it can regenerate itself when its body gets damaged in various ways. It's kind of freaky and monstrous, to say the least. So it's a great villain to have. And I would recommend that you continue, of course, as I said, with some normal bounty hunter and maybe some things that would train and help them to advance their abilities as bounty hunters. So let's move on and talk about Armitage III. So Armitage III is set in this future where there was overpopulation on Earth, so they colonized Mars. Now, when they colonized Mars, because Earth was sort of feminist, they sent a lot of males there, but they needed some help with people. So they created the generations of android. They started the first type and the second type of androids. That, these two types of androids, as they're developing them, help them colonize it. But of course, Mars has its problems. There's not a lot of women there. There's a lot of population problems, things going on. Now we enter in our protagonist, Ross Syllabus. He's a cop from Chicago who, because of something terrible happening in his past where his partner got killed by a robot, he decided to transfer to Mars because it's going to be much more of a peaceful time going there. He runs into his partner when he gets to the airport, his new partner, Naomi Armitage. which he always calls Armitage, pretty much. Now, the two of them, they stumble onto this case where they learn about the third type of androids. Androids that look like people and effectively can hide in amongst them. And someone is now assassinating them, killing them off. That people didn't know about these. The horrible things beginning happening in the town, and third types, like the entire storyline behind why they exist, why they're there, and why people haven't been talking about them, sort of settles into things, and you kind of get into depths about it, and it involves, Ross looking to his own past and getting over whatever problems he had with what happened with his partner, and there's this kind of past that Naomi has that she has to confront that kind of links into what's going on with this storyline, that she kind of would know more than what's letting on, that eventually you find out what's going on with her. And it's really a great series. It's a series of OVAs. They did a movie, Armitage Polymatrix, which is a summary of the first OVAs. And they did a sequel, Armitage Dual Matrix, which talks about the future of Naomi and Ross. Because, they sort of find relationships with each other. Unfortunately, when I'm going to go on the genres a second, romance was sort of low on the list amongst all the other ones, but it was a little bit of a romance, I'll say that now. So it's an action. There's battle signs between, fighting out robots and cyborgs and gunfights and interesting things that are going on with, like, the assassin, who you learn is like this reprogrammed Type 2 android himself that's been programmed to kill the Type 3s. And there's this entire plot line that involves what's going on Mars, involved why they created in the first place. And it's really interesting. It's definitely cyberpunk in feeling. That kind of the dirty, gritty cyber technology, robotics kind of feeling exists heavily in here, and I would call it very cool. And it isn't sci-fi, actually. It is set in, like, Mars in the future with spaceships and interesting things, laser weapons, giant robots. So there's this mixture of cyberpunk and your traditional sci-fi, which I think permeates it more than anything. And I would rate this one a 5 also. So moving on and talking about using it in your BESM game, I would recommend 300 points for your characters, and you're going to have them part of the Mars Police Department and beginning to deal with the problems of what's going on with the thirds, the murders. You could deal with some of the political issues going on. You could even take some of the plot points from some of the later movie, Dual Matrix, and kind of go along those lines, where we deal a lot more with what's going on Earth and reflecting it on Mars also. And we do Journey to Earth too, so you could take it on either route there. I'd say you could keep it simple to begin out with, and you could work from there. And of course, again, you're going to be a team of officers, more than just, a couple of partners. You could have one of the people be a third type that was in disguise. That's an option too. What you would do is, because you have a good amount of points, is you're making the normal human characters less racially biased, that they have probably a lot more skills and equipment and things like of that nature that they have access to, rather than the third type, which would just be racially better. It's a like android / cyborg kind of thing. Biological android, I believe, is like a proper way to say it, or something like that. So it'd be an interesting duality between that group of characters and developing the relationships there that shows the general relationships and how they should develop on the planet. So it's an interesting take on a genre that would be very fun to play in, and it's an interesting setting. So let's move on and talk about the two from 2015. The first one is technically part of a long-standing series. It's the Lupin the III. Lupin the III has been around in a lot of television series, OVAs, movies, and a couple spin-offs. This was technically the fourth series of episodes that was put out. The first series came out in 1971, so consider how long it's been. And you can say, like, oh, it's a lot of distance. It's a lot of movies and OVAs have filled in those gaps over the years. So technically speaking, there isn't like a huge gap of material based on Lupin the III. So Lupin the III focuses on Arsène Lupin III, grandson of the very famous Arsène Lupin from French novels. So he's the grandson of another fictional character. And he's a gentleman thief in and of himself that goes around and steals things from various people while being a master of sleight of hand and disguise and all around tricky. He's accompanied by a team of friends that he sort of assembles along the way. Daisuke Jikan, who's a expert markman, one of like the best people with a gun he knows. Goemon Ishimura the 13th, who's from a long line of effectively samurai, who's an expert with his sword and kind of has that like Iaijutsu strike he can get, like the whoosh, and something falls in half. he's kind of epic that way. Fujiko Mie, who's effectively Lupin's sort of romantic interest. She's friend, enemy at different points in times, different storylines. She's always out for herself, but Lupin really likes her, but she always kind of has this weird kind of relationship with him. She never quite lets him get close enough. And as I said, they go around stealing things, getting into situations, getting into interesting adventures, all while being chased by Hijiri Zenigata IV, who is the great-grandson of a very famous Japanese detective who is an expert at Lupin and eventually joins up with Interpol, and using the connections with them, he effectively chases Lupin all around the world trying to capture him and his crew, with really poor successes because he's a very interesting character, but he's sort of the Tom to Lupin's Jerry. Think of it that way a little bit, that there's that cat and mouse game between them that's constantly going on, and a lot of the interesting things going on revolve around that. Now it's an adventure one. They travel to very interesting places in the world, go to new exciting places to steal things, deal with various people and places. It's a little bit of a comedy drama. There's a lot of very interesting comedic situations, but oftentimes when they get into a place that involves whatever they're stealing, there's these dark undertones. And really, because this comes into our last one, he's a gentleman thief. He does steal things, but he doesn't steal things that'll mess you up. He steals things in certain ways, like, maybe he'll steal your crown jewels, but in the result of him doing it, he might get your kingdom a little better or something like that. That he would have messed up the horrible person that was taking advantage of you and gets them thrown in jail. Of course, he gets what he wants in the end, but, if something good happens out of it along the way, it's a plus. So there's a very interesting juxtaposition that he's got this, the gentleman thief going on, and also that kind of mixture of the comedy and drama at the same time, because, again, very dark undertones in certain things can exist, and very, he can have such interesting villains which goes against him almost, or villainous characters, which reflects back on him kind of greatly. I would definitely rate this one a 5. It's a classic. If you could see any of them, I would recommend checking them out. I've seen some of the second series and most of the fourth series, and I've seen some of the movies. Plenty of stuff to watch in the series, though. I recommend 250 points. You're going to make a team of gentlemen thieves, or, effectively the same. You don't have men or women, it doesn't really matter, but it's the idea of the gentleman thief, where you're going to a place to steal a certain thing, and the team comes up with some kind of plan or ideas that you then execute it. And of course, they come up with a number of backup plans and things like that. And the overwhelming levels of the plan is what comes to mind, and the overall idea of we have something that we want to get, and we'll go about an interesting way of doing it in a very creative way. Because you're not out for the murder or the death about it. It's the idea and the challenge of stealing it that's your entire goal out of this entire thing. And your team is back, and you'll have to deal with, of course, the normal authorities, guards or something like this. Maybe more villainous people that you'll have to deal with. And, you also have to deal with probably some kind of antagonist like Zenigata that's chasing you down constantly and always after you. And that'll be sort of the main person going against you all the times. The essence of the law. And the last one I want to talk about is Classroom Crisis, because this is a little bit of an interesting one. It's set in a future where interplanet travel is very big and there, and we focus on this company called the Krishima Company. This is this mega corporation that's based around this sort of interplanetary aerospace traveling. They form this academy on Mars that is there to teach people specifically to groom them to becoming important employees in their company. We see ATEC, this specialized team basically of scientists and engineers in training, that they go into this classroom where they develop things like new engine technology, experimental vehicles, and And so we focus on their adventures, where they have this mixed bag of then they have half their time in the classroom, half their time kind of developing these sort of engines, and they not only have to deal with all the kind of classroom, normal kind of teenager problems, but they also have to deal with the kind of fact that they're technically employed, and they have to deal with upper management and things going on with the job, and it's this interesting juxtaposition between classroom and work almost at the same time that makes for a very interesting series. Now it's got some romantic comedy elements, that there's these relationships between some of the characters that are developed slowly in the series that are very interesting and entertaining. It's of course a science fiction. It's set in this sort of distant future with interplanetary travel and space travel going from Mars to various other locations. I'd also call it a school-based one, because it is the idea of the specialized academy where they're at. Technically, they're also part of a company, but it is an academy and a school where they're learning and developing things. I rate this one a 3. It's a really cool and interesting series, but I mean, it's not like super exciting some of the times because it is about people developing an engine and dealing with problems within a company and a school at the same time. So it's interesting, but it's just not like gonna grab you all the time. Now for your BESM game, I would say 200 points. You're gonna have your people members of the A-Tech class. Of course, you're going to want to fill in the blanks with a number of NPCs taking on the various like points in the grouping that your players don't take up, and effectively then your group will be developing things like engines and spaceships, and they'll be testing those spaceships, and of course they'll have their normal classroom duties, but then they'll have to not only develop the classroom, they'll have to develop things along the lines of developing a new engine, inventing it, putting it together, testing it. They'll have to deal with the management side and balancing things along those lines, keeping up with certain schedules. They'll have to compete in various competitions to show off their vehicles, go on test runs, do things that are revolving around, maybe you want to keep to some of the similar plots to the anime where there's this threat of the classroom being shut down and they have a certain time frame in order to successfully develop things, and it takes a series of tests. You can only do so much over a time period that you've got a crunch time that maybe you're not going to get it done. Things that are interesting like that you can develop these storylines that maybe like you have a certain amount of research you can do a week, and so then you do that and other things are happening during that week that is helping developing the overall storyline, that may be like, oh, there's also a budget crisis. Oh, you want to do a test on it now that you've developed it a little bit better to make sure it's working properly. Okay, is the test pilot, getting together? Is something happened to the test pilot? Accident during the mission? All these things which can make for a very interesting time of balancing out almost like this interesting research, school life, and company work kind of meshed together all in one, which should be pretty fun to play. So that's it for today. I introduced you to 4 more anime series and talked about using them in your BESM games, introduced you to a little bit about them, told you what kind of hints that you would use if you're going to use them in a BESM game. If you have any questions, comments, anything you want to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe to support the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show extra support, you can check out my Patreon, link in the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.